que considere esto. La reconciliación debería estar explícitamente presente en el núcleo del carisma de la compañía, porque es una gracia que hemos recibido de Dios en estos 10 primeros años fundacionales y no puede estar ausente del mission statement, del propósito fundacional de la compañía. Nosotros, los jesuitas, nos dedicamos a la reconciliación. Bajo este insight de Nadal, su secretario, Ignacio cogió la pluma y corrigió la fórmula del Instituto de 1540, en 1550 la corrigió y puso que esta compañía ha sido fundada para reconciliar. Esta compañía, y dice San Ignacio, cada jesuita debe prepararse, debe estar preparado para la misión de reconciliar. La pregunta es, ¿estamos preparados? Are we ready? Are we Jesuit and lay collaborators in our universities? Are we ready to explicitly reconcile those estranged? How do we get ready through a political spirituality? Father General was talking this morning very much about the spirituality and the depth in the political, spiritual, or mystical action of the society. Are we ready through a political spirituality to build bridges of reconciliation through the revolution of tenderness, an expression of Pope Francis? Before the COVID crisis and before the Ukrainian war, the Pope warns us. We are living in a third world war due to a combination of different and interdependent pieces of violence worldwide. Antonio Gutierrez, Secretary General of United Nations, that has been recalled here yesterday and today, he sounds the same alarm for all of us. The alarm is our world is facing the biggest global peace and security crisis in recent years. That is why every Jesuit university present here today should be ready to reconcile through global networks. That is the aim of our task forces these days. All of them, you will listen one after the other, all of them are dealing with different and interdependent, entangled injustices and violences globally. 4 years ago, in Deusto, Bilbao, in Loyola, following the insight of St. Ignatius and Nadal at the beginning of the society, the reconciliation insight that was recovered by the General Congregation 32 and later much more in depth, more intentionally, and more explicitly by the congregation, the General Congregation 35th and 36th, Father General Arturo Sosa addressed the just born International Association of Jesuit Universities with a keynote titled Universities Source of Reconciled Life. Universities Source of Reconciled Life, 4 years ago. How our universities can evolve, how can we become more and more sources of reconciled life in a broken world. This panel aims at bringing some light into this complex question from good practices in some of our universities. Gaia Pangano, coordinator of our task force, will introduce our guests here at the table for this purpose. But please, find and listen to all those Nadals that are in your institutions. Those Nadals that remind you that the Jesuit mission is the mission of reconciliation, and that mission has to be explicit. So thank you very much. Enjoy the panel. Gaia, the floor is yours.
Bueno, hablaré en español. Mi nombre es Gaia Pagano y trabajo en el Instituto de Estudios Interculturales de la Pontificia Universidad Javeriana de Cali y acompaño la Task Force. Quiero aprovechar para presentarles los co-chairs de esa Task Force, Elías, que acaban de escuchar para los que no los conocen, jesuita, ha acompañado muchos procesos de reconciliación, en particular desde el Servicio Jesuita a Refugiados, y Jacques Hare, que es experto en la reconciliación discernida desde un enfoque transdisciplinar, que ahora nos comentará más alrededor de eso, y nos acompaña desde UCSIA, el centro universitario, y Amherst University. Bueno, vamos a arrancar este panel con un testimonio concreto, con una práctica de reconciliación que hemos querido traerles desde Colombia. Como ustedes saben, un país con un conflicto interno muy profundo y muy complejo, y lo que hemos querido hoy para arrancar ese panel sobre paz y reconciliación es traerles una posibilidad concreta de caminar la reconciliación entre opuestos, entre contrarios y entre dos personas que han sido enemigos. Entonces, en el video van a conocer la experiencia de dos excombatientes, uno del Ejército Nacional y la otra persona de la exguerrilla de las FARC. Estas dos personas hoy trabajan juntos de la mano para construir un futuro distinto para Colombia y han sido parte de un proceso de diálogo social y de reconciliación que ha venido acompañando la Universidad Javeriana en Cali.
Empiezo a participar y a dinamizar en estos intercambios, en estos acercamientos que a hoy día observo han sido muy positivos y han permitido generar bastantes avances, donde han sucedido varias situaciones que se han manejado a través de esos lazos de cercanía y de unión que se han generado a través de la creación del grupo, pero sobre todo por la intermediación de la academia a través de la universidad y el instituto. Es un aprendizaje importante darse la oportunidad de conocer al otro, conocer su pensamiento y sobre todo de respetar la verdad que cada uno cuenta dentro de sus desarrollos. Los acercamientos nos han permitido disgregar, tener conversaciones diversas, discutir con altos niveles de arraigo, pero también nos ha enseñado a darnos la oportunidad de entrar a acuerdos y de entrar a elementos que al fondo nos permiten generar una sana reconciliación.
He podido conocer personas que nunca pensé conocer, personas que verdaderamente me permitieron conocer ese ser humano. Estando en armas siempre abogué por la paz, siempre dentro de las conversaciones que teníamos con los demás guerrilleros, hablábamos sobre cómo poder resolver el conflicto por la vía dialogada, pero por el ruido de la guerra, pues no nos permitía mirar, digamos, alguna forma de cómo poderlo hacer. He podido verdaderamente estar en esos espacios con víctimas y contar esos relatos y contarlos de tal forma que le permitan a las víctimas sanar.
La importancia de la academia en este escenario es fundamental porque nos permite hablar con la total libertad y total disposición de exponer nuestras ideas, de interpretar las ideas del otro, de generar consensos a través de disensos y establecer canales de comunicación, puentes de conexión y acciones que realmente han generado impactos y que son estos impactos medibles, viables.
Me ha permitido a mí poder tener un mayor acercamiento con las comunidades, con líderes y lideresas de las comunidades en los municipios donde yo estuve, cuando estaba en armas, y que hoy estemos trabajando por sacar adelante proyectos. Ha sido un espacio que nos ha ayudado a reflexionar, a tener un mayor compromiso con la paz de Colombia y a permitirnos visualizar un país distinto.
Bueno, con este video queríamos introducir el trabajo de la Pontificia Universidad Javeriana de Cali. Entonces invito al padre Luis Felipe Gómez Restrepo, rector de esta universidad, para que nos comparta un poco más alrededor de ese compromiso desde una universidad jesuita con la misión de reconciliación.
Gracias, Gaya. Muy buenas tardes para todos y para todas. Les hablo desde ese país, un país el más biodiverso que tenemos allí en la zona de América Latina, pero también el más violento. Allí donde hemos tenido una guerra de más de 50 años, con más de 9 millones de víctimas, dentro de las cuales el 80%, víctimas civiles. Desde allí, nosotros vimos una oportunidad como universidad con el acuerdo de paz. Y muy bien, utilizando las palabras del Padre General, soltamos las riendas y el caballo salió corriendo. Y les quiero contar hacia dónde fue. Primero, decidimos acoger a los excombatientes una vez entregaron las armas a la vida civil. Y en un auditorio como este, los graduamos de un diplomado en vida civil, en elementos para la vida civil. Pero como en el Evangelio, el hermano mayor del hijo pródigo nos señaló, exalumnos nuestros nos señalaron de cómo en el lugar donde nos han graduado a nosotros, ahora están esos antiguos guerrilleros. No ha sido fácil. Luego, con el testimonio que vimos en el video, acercando a los contrarios, como decía Luis Arriaga ayer, generando puentes entre aquellos que eran enemigos. Allí el que había sido el secuestrador y estaba el empresario. Estaban también activistas sociales que habían sido perseguidos también por la guerrilla. Gracias a eso hemos hecho el milagro del amor a los enemigos, y es verlos a ellos reconciliados trabajando por el país. Gracias al apoyo del País Vasco y de la Fundación Ford, y con la ayuda metodológica de Adam Kaheime, que trabajó muy fuerte en Sudáfrica. Allí estamos trabajando por ello. Tercero, la Comisión de la Verdad, que es uno de los elementos fundamentales para la paz en Colombia y cuyo presidente es un jesuita, el padre Francisco de Rú, anterior provincial de la compañía. Nosotros la hemos acompañado a esta comisión metodológicamente para que la verdad nos haga libres, como dice el Evangelio. Finalmente, tuvimos un gran revés social en Colombia, una gran huelga nacional, y nuestra ciudad Cali fue el epicentro de la resistencia, la resistance. Muy bien. allí presente, con todo el dolor humano que había generado la pandemia en la mitad de la población de nuestra ciudad. Pues muy bien, comenzaron a matar a los muchachos que estaban bloqueando la ciudad y la universidad salió en defensa de ellos. Y por eso nos tildan de comunistas, por luchar para que haya vida y la haya en abundancia. Esto es el riesgo que hemos asumido como universidad, pero también frutos espirituales y sociales en bien de nuestra ciudad Cali. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Padre Luis Felipe. Entonces vamos a avanzar con el panel y con las intervenciones. Vamos a ver con los otros panelistas cómo estas tres funciones sustantivas de las cuales el Padre Rector Luis Felipe nos comentó, se ha comprometido la Universidad Javeriana desde la investigación, la formación y el servicio a la sociedad o la apropiación social del conocimiento. Lo vamos a ver reflejado en otras iniciativas en otros países en el mundo. Entonces vamos a arrancar con la función de investigación y voy a presentarles a Elías Omondio Pongo. Elías es docente e investigador de estudios aplicados del Colegio Universitario Ekima en Kenia. Es actualmente el director del Centro de Investigación, Formación y Publicaciones de esta universidad. Elías tiene una amplia experiencia en África del Este, en investigación aplicada, y nos va a compartir alrededor de esas lecciones aprendidas y retos del modelo de investigación sobre paz y reconciliación.
I'd like to thank all the organizers for this particular conference and for giving us this chance to really share with you the importance of research, particularly reconciliation research at the university setting. I have, for the last 20 years, conducted peace and reconciliation research and direct conflict resolution engagement in different parts of Africa. My concentration has largely been in Eastern and Central Africa, and I've conducted field research in the last 15 years in communities that have experienced conflict in Kenya, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. And of course, in addition to the opportunity I get in teaching at the Ekima Institute of Peace Studies and International Relations, and also the Center for Research, Training, and Publications at Hekima University College in Nairobi, Kenya. I've come to realize the importance of integrating the Ignatian approach to reconciliation research, bringing persons caught in the destruction of conflict at the center of research. The natural desire for most of our Jesuit university, obviously, is to find solution to this particular conflict. We tend to push, perhaps, for peace settlements, for ceasefire agreements, and for reconciliation through multidisciplinary approaches, largely in social sciences. However, as insider third-party Jesuit universities researching on peace and conflict ought to be guided by at least what I consider 4 important pillars founded on Ignatian pedagogical values, namely understanding contextual complexities, applying reflective research methodologies, and handling controversial issues, as well as creating rays of hope. Let me begin with the first pillar, understanding contextual complexities. I've worked in diverse multicultural settings, and I've learned the richness of these cultures and how they represent life that is grounded in rich traditions that can ontologically be defined as the epicenter of their existence. I've particularly been intrigued by the diverse cultural rituals of reconciliation and efforts by the church to intervene in situations of conflict. And so in an effort to contribute to reconciliation, it is important for our Jesuit universities to recognize this cultural diversity and to avoid the temptation for monocultural domination based on academic deductions. As academicians, we ought to understand the cultural wisdom that exists beyond academic logic. Second pillar, reflective research methodologies. The research methods in multicultural settings, and more particularly communities in conflict, ought to take into account the cultural variation in the analysis of issues of concern. My experience has been that researching on reconciliation in the above cultural context has largely been through thick narratives of experiences of conflict and reconciliation. Without pretending to fully make sense of these narratives, the Ignatian approach to listen, observe, deepen the experience, and relate with the context have been very helpful for me. One becomes an insider, third-party researcher. One becomes an ally to that experience. And so a phenomenological approach to research is important here, through diverse narratives and structures that allow research participants to express themselves and give their personal experiences, as well as explore ways of resolving the conflict. The third pillar, handling controversial issues. Jesuit academic institutions have the privilege of playing the role of third-party mediator in handling conflicts, especially in highly sensitive and divided societies. There is, however, the danger of being consumed and trapped in the controversies around the research topics. Researching communities in conflict implies sensitivity to controversial issues, particularly those that touch on identity, livelihood, and representation. I've encountered, for example, the following controversial statements. You cannot have peace of mind if there is no peace in the stomach. This was a teacher in Somalia, calling for economic justice as part of conflict resolution. One told me in northern Uganda, a religious leader, I am against cultural reconciliation rituals. They are not in line with Christian teachings. Jesus was the only sacrifice. And another from southern Sudan, in a mediation process that we are having in Addis Ababa, revenge is part and parcel of our cultural existence. You cannot be at peace if you have not revenged past attacks. You have the obligation to honor your family with the revenge act. And lastly, reconciliation has to include addressing historical injustices and promoting inclusive forms of governance. That's from a civil society activist in Kenya. As you can see, the above quotations demonstrate the tensions between academic research, cultural and social perceptions, and religious values that we hold very much dear in our Jesuit institutions. How do you accept a statement that revenge is part and parcel of our cultural practice? And so it brings to fore this question: how can Jesuit academic institutions become a platform for enhancing dialogue across divergent perceptions and positions on reconciliation? My experience has been that these communities in conflict trust church institutions, like our own Jesuit institution, to initiate a sense-making process of reconciliation that is centered on human dignity and promotion of common good. My fourth and last pillar, creating rays of hope. While the Jesuit academic institutions cannot pretend to find solutions to the numerous conflicts they encounter, creating avenues for dialogue through reconciliation research by itself contributes to rays of hope. Often, communities struggling to achieve reconciliation are sandwiched between historical experiences of conflict and looking forward to a peaceful coexistence. The ultimate task in my view, for Jesuit universities is to bring together the diverse experiences of reconciliation in different countries and explore in a comparative study hybrid strategies of reconciliation that are contextually appropriate. As Jesuit universities, we have the privilege of what I may call a space for academic harvesting of experiences from different contexts, whether we're talking of Congo, Colombia, Sri Lanka, United States, Basque Country, or elsewhere, or India. This contextual hybridity enriches the research for most appropriate solution to diverse conflicts. And so to conclude, I would say, to achieve the above, Jesuit universities ought to be part and parcel of reconciliation process in respective countries, contributing to whichever level, research, advocacy, policy formulation, recommendation for peace interventions. And this implies, as Pope Francis advises, moving away from culture of indifference to a culture of encounter and social change. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, gracias Elías, con esta intervención y este llamado al abordaje multicultural e intercultural desde la investigación, esa investigación aplicada y práctica, conectada con esos contextos tan complejos. Bueno, doy el paso a Alma María Salvador, del Ateneo de Manila University. Alma es docente de Ciencias Políticas de este Ateneo y tiene la experiencia de haber coordinado programas educativos de aprendizaje en el campo en distintas comunidades en Filipinas en temas de cambio social y construcción de paz. Entonces nos va a profundizar más alrededor de la función sustantiva de formación.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to talk about the efforts of the Department of Political Science of Ateneo de Manila towards teaching peace and reconciliation. So I begin with 2018 when we began with curricular change for the purpose of reinforcing our formation goals of training leaders of reconciliation, justice, and accountability. Since then, my department has aligned our efforts towards this objective. We've been teaching digital natives since 2015, and doing so and addressing the needs of the Gen Z students have posed some challenges and at the same time opportunities. A few of these challenges include information overload, the role of social media influencers in their choices, and what we perceive to be their increasing disconnection from shared past history of collective struggle and collective action born from our past history of being under 2 decades of martial rule and 50 years of internal security conflict against the communists and the Muslims in the South. These challenges make our students rather susceptible to disinformation. At the same time, however, their characteristics and their dispositions also create some opportunities. As we've seen in the previous panel on global citizenship, they are pragmatic. TJ is one of our majors. They are immersed in global and regional discourses of inclusion and diversity, and their access to technology aids them in becoming global citizens. In talking about our educational methodology, I posed this question then: how do we accompany our students to bridge the past to the present so that we could move on and determine our directions for the future as a post-authoritarian and post-conflict society? I'd like to share some of our approaches. In 2016, 4 decades since the declaration of martial rule, my colleague, Dr. Benjamin Tolosa, professor of political science, took to the stand to respond to then Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who said, "Leave history to the historians. The past is the past. What we need is to address the needs of the present." Tolosa, in resonating 40 years of Father Arupe's Men for Others, when we celebrated it sometime in 2016, argued for the need to re-educate for justice. There's a broader context of remembering, Tolosa said, and that was the flip side of martial rule, the people power revolution that deposed the past dictator. Second approach, intergenerational storytelling. In 2005, Ateneo de Manila Press published Down from the Hill. It's a book about student activism in the Ateneo in 1972 when martial law was declared until 1982. My colleague, Assistant Professor Melissa Lau, in a chapter she wrote, highlighted the resilience of student organizations during those dark years when organizations were banished and the brightest and the best of our student leaders killed and disappeared. Martial rule also spurred the development of Ateneo's immersion and social action programs in the Ateneo. This book remains to be a resource for our own majors. Public storytelling is our third strategy. During the pandemic, we opened our classrooms to the digital resources of the Martial Law Museum, which we launched as a website in 2017. The former chair of the National Historical Commission of my country said in her opening speech, "Memory gives hope." Active classroom learning. As part of our efforts in the social construction of transitional justice, Associate Professor Lourdes Ralionza launched an exhibit for teaching and public awareness of the documented narratives on sexual abuse of women by the Philippine military during the Marcos rule. And the last strategy, teaching advocacy. Having said all of those issues with reference to the role of the military in the propagation of violence during those dark period, my colleague and myself have embarked on using our advocacy on security sector reform to influence our students to speak for truth. The next question we ask ourselves is, how do we then try to form change agents from within our students? I'd like to highlight our service learning program. Service learning is a space for our students to be engaged in everyday and institutional politics. It is a space for political participation. Through learning by refraction, we recognize that our students can make sense of their experience where they are at. So context matters, specifically when they try to make sense of their encounter and knowing of the excluded other in view of their educational experience against the 4-year formation program of our university. However, accompanying our students in this journey has its own challenges. I present two of the bigger challenges. Number one, failure of the liberal democratic promise. Father Matthew Carnes earlier did mention about the disenchantment of people or of the youth of how the liberal democratic promise has turned out to be. In 1986, since we fought for freedom against the dictatorship, our country has not ended dynastic politics. The Marcoses are back, and they remain entrenched in local politics. We have yet to fully realize the transitional justice processes for the victims of martial rule. Our people remain poor and our feudal and clientelistic politics want to keep it that way. Second challenge. More recently, our colleague from the history department posted a tweet on Twitter. History, in response to one of the messages of the members of the Marcos government, of the Ferdinand Marcos Jr. government, who is now our president, Professor Ambeth Ocampo said, "History may have bias, but it is based on fact, not opinion. Real history is about truth, not lies, not fiction." He was mobbed by the troll army, which compelled our own university to release a public statement. Indeed, there is more work to be done. On that note, I say thank you everyone for listening.
Muchas gracias, Alma. Bueno, vamos a finalizar este recorrido por las tres funciones sustantivas, abordando ahora la función de servicio a la sociedad o apropiación social del conocimiento. Entonces quiero presentarles al padre Jorge Peláez, rector de la Pontificia Universidad Javeriana Colombia, y al padre Enrique Sanz, rector de la Pontificia Universidad de Comillas. Ellos nos van a compartir el libro que es el fruto del simposio organizado durante el 2021 por IAJU sobre reconciliación ignaciana.
Muchas gracias. El padre Jorge y un servidor tenemos 8 minutos para esta presentación, 4 cada uno, así que voy a presentar 4 puntos. El padre Jorge va a presentar la conferencia que se celebró en Madrid, presencial y online, en mayo del 21 y su fruto principal, que es este libro, y yo voy a presentarles en 4 breves puntos su trasfondo, su background. Comienzo con el primero, que es el 11 de julio del 2018, en Deusto, el padre Sosa lanzó una invitación a las universidades de la Compañía de Jesús, a la red IAJU, que entonces se fundó, recogiendo a su vez una invitación de la Congregación General 36, que dice así, cito la Congregación General: nuestras obras educativas a todos los niveles y nuestros centros de comunicación e investigación social tienen que ser una ayuda para la formación de hombres y mujeres comprometidos con la reconciliación, que sean capaces de superar los obstáculos que a ella se oponen y proponer soluciones. Esta cita de la congregación, que como les digo es una invitación para las obras educativas y todas las obras de los jesuitas, es la que recoge el padre Sosa en la invitación que nos hizo en Deusto. Segundo punto, esta invitación pone en marcha unos procesos, y cito también palabras del propio padre Sosa. La universidad, dice él, fomenta procesos de creación de conocimiento y acompaña procesos de formación humana en los que, junto a los conocimientos, transmite el sentido de la vida reconciliada y en paz. Las universidades, en sus palabras, ponen en marcha procesos hacia adentro de las propias comunidades educativas, punto muy importante que tiene que ver con la conferencia, con el libro y con otras acciones de transferencia que hacemos en las universidades, y también con las comunidades territoriales donde están estas universidades. Poner en marcha estos procesos hacia adentro y hacer que estos que ponemos hacia adentro también trasciendan nuestras propias fronteras de los centros y lleguen a las comunidades territoriales. El padre Felipe nos ha presentado un ejemplo ilustrativo al respecto. Tercer punto, estos procesos que hemos dicho que se ponen en marcha dentro de las comunidades universitarias y en las comunidades territoriales donde se encuentran, tienen la particularidad de construir puentes de interculturalidad en el interior de las comunidades, al elaborar una conciencia crítica que reconoce la cultura de otros de forma enriquecedora. Esta forma de relacionamiento tiene como instrumento significativo la cooperación entre las universidades, de manera que estos procesos que se ponen en marcha en nuestras comunidades universitarias y en nuestros territorios también nos permiten, tercer punto, establecer puentes y colaboraciones entre instituciones, en este caso de la Compañía de Jesús. Es el caso, cuarto punto con el que concluyo, de la colaboración que nació en Deusto 2018 entre la Universidad Javeriana de Colombia y la Universidad de Comillas de Madrid, y que, bajo la orientación y el estímulo del padre Garancini, Mike, thank you very much, se organizó, gracias a esa orientación, organizamos una conferencia internacional de reconciliación ignaciana de la crisis y el enfrentamiento a la sanación y el perdón. ¿Cómo es posible la reconciliación? Este es el título. Conferencia que se realizó, como les decía, en mayo de 2021 en Madrid, en modalidad combinada, presencial y remota. En ella, ahora se la va a presentar con detalle el padre Peláez, además de abordajes conceptuales sobre la reconciliación, se presentaron experiencias consolidadas en territorios o con comunidades específicas de construcción de paz y reconciliación de instituciones vinculadas a la Compañía de Jesús.
Buenas tardes para todos. Gracias, Padre Enrique. Esta ha sido una experiencia muy bella de cooperación entre Comillas y la Javeriana, cooperación que tiene una larga historia. Quisimos dar respuesta, como lo ha explicado Enrique, a esta invitación del Padre General, y en este evento presencial y virtual quisimos tener unos keynote speakers, unos expertos de muy alto nivel que ilustraran nuestras reflexiones. Invitamos, por ejemplo, a José García de Castro de la Universidad Pontificia Comillas, a Teresa Betancourt de Boston College, al padre Orobator del Jekima College, a Pedro Walpole del Ateneo de Manila, a John Paul Lederach de Notre Dame University, que es un experto mundialmente reconocido en estos temas de reconciliación y paz, y también Pedro Valenzuela de nuestra Universidad Javeriana, para que nos ilustraran con el marco conceptual. En esta conferencia se presentaron 41 experiencias en paz y reconciliación. Esta es la gran riqueza de este libro y de este trabajo. Provenientes de países como Australia, Canadá, Colombia, Costa de Marfil, Ecuador, Estados Unidos, España, Filipinas, Francia, India, Italia, Kenia, Líbano, México, Ruanda, Uganda, Rusia y Venezuela, experiencias sobre obras de la Compañía de Jesús, obras sociales, parroquias, obras educativas, alrededor del tema de la reconciliación y la paz. ¿Cuáles estas experiencias que fueron presentadas fueron analizadas por 21 expertos internacionales para escoger, y después de esta selección quedaron 41 experiencias? ¿Cuáles fueron los criterios para aceptar este tipo de aportes? Que tuvieran un marco conceptual sobre reconciliación. Segundo, que se aplicara en una comunidad y en un territorio concreto. Tercero, que la experiencia tuviera un carácter interdisciplinario. Cuarto, que hubiera tenido un proceso de evaluación. Y quinto, que la experiencia estuviera documentada en sus resultados. Todo esto con el fin de contribuir a la pedagogía, con énfasis en reconciliación ignaciana que trabajamos en nuestras universidades jesuitas. Estas memorias que estamos entregando a ustedes tienen el fin de contribuir a que estas conversaciones sobre perdón, sobre reconciliación, se den y se multipliquen, de modo que la reconstrucción del tejido social deje de ser una utopía para convertirse en una posibilidad palpable. En los materiales que recibimos está esto que sirve para marcar los libros. Aquí ven ustedes un código QR. Ese código QR permite bajar este libro en modalidad electrónica, $0, 0 euros. Es una atención que tenemos, comillas y la Javeriana, para todas nuestras universidades amigas y que ojalá sea un material que pueda ayudar a la reflexión en nuestras universidades. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Quiero agradecer a todos los panelistas por compartir su experiencia y resaltar pues algunas ideas clave que han sido el hilo también entre sus intervenciones, la importancia de ese trabajo en el contexto de estas inmersiones de los estudiantes como también de los investigadores en esos contextos en los cuales trabajamos y promovemos procesos de reconciliación, la reflexión junto con la acción, la incidencia, el tener en cuenta que como universidades podemos adelantar y procesos de incidencia con los tomadores de decisiones, la centralidad del diálogo como escucha y del diálogo también como valor y como reconocimiento de la diversidad, como el Padre General mencionaba esta mañana, y como punto de partida de la co-creación de nuevo conocimiento desde procesos colaborativos. Y finalmente, pues la importancia de ese llamado a poner el conocimiento al servicio de la reconciliación para sanar un mundo herido y pensar, como también nos invitó en pasado el Padre General a pensar la universidad como fuente de vida reconciliada. Entonces, doy ahora la palabra a Jacques y a Elías. Nos van a compartir esos avances de la reflexión y del discernimiento en común que la Task Force vino adelantando en este tiempo alrededor de la tradición ignaciana y de la reconciliación discernida desde una aproximación transdisciplinar.
Thank you, Gaia. We are going to go deeper a bit conceptually in the Ignatian reconciliation framework, and here are some of the findings. So, how to understand reconciliation from the Jesuit narrative. Reconciliation, okay, we have there different etymological different parts of the word. Reconciliation comes from kaleo, conciliation, that means in Greek to call with, con, together, again. To call people again, people who have been separated violently by an injustice. This is what reconciliation means etymologically. When we look at it from the perspective of the Ignatian narrative, the Jesuit narrative, to see what is the added value or our way of looking at reconciliation, we can see in this model 4 triangles that are linked, 4 triangles for the conceptual map. First one, it's coming from General Congregation 32. Faith, service of faith that promotes justice at the aim of reconciliation. This threefold mission statement of the Society of Jesus was there, but this third element of reconciliation was not seen clearly at that moment. It was later, in General Congregation 35th, in year 2008, that we developed the concept of reconciliation in this other triangle, conceptual triangle. Reconciliation has to do with 3 different actors: reconciliation with God, faith; reconciliation with oneself and with others, justice; and this other element that was coming up clearly in a world where we do so much violence against the environment, the common home. Here we have the 2 triangles mapping the concept of reconciliation. In between, we have General Congregation 33 and 34. There we touch the mission through the concepts of intercultural and interreligious dialogue. This also belongs to this conceptual map in our way of understanding reconciliation. We have the third triangle. The third triangle is talking about our universal apostolic preferences, 4 preferences. The first one, again, showing the way to God, and this one, as we know, the comment of Pope Francis is the most important, the most relevant one. So, deepening our roots in reconciliation in the process of the spiritual exercises and the process of spiritual discernment emerging from this depth of the spiritual exercises. Second, universal apostolic preference is walking with the excluded. Although reconciliation is much more explicit here, what we see in the universal apostolic preferences is that reconciliation is at the beginning of the introduction of the 4 universal apostolic preferences, although more explicit in this second one, walking with the excluded. Then we are going to jump to the fourth, caring for our common home, reconciliation with creation. And then we are going to put the third one in the last position, journeying with youth to promote their hope. We had this morning here a panel of young students of us, and they are searching for that hope. We are searching with them also for that hope, and we're trying to do it intergenerationally. They mentioned that and underlined that with strength. And this is journeying with youth, the youth that we have in our classrooms every day, journeying with them for the mission of reconciliation is a transversal of all these 4 triangles at the core of our mission for reconciliation in our universities. We have the youth every day, plenty of hours with us, journeying with them for reconciliation. From them, we have discovered a concept that we have coined, that is a concept that is, before that, the 3 functions of universities: research, teaching, and service to society. This is the mapping, the conceptual map of the mission of reconciliation from the 3 major functions of our universities. Now, going back to journeying with the youth, we have coined a concept that is preventive reconciliation that has to do precisely with this journey with the youth for hope, for a future full of hope, when the future is under threat, as we have heard. What is preventive reconciliation? It is an experience that we have found in East Timor, from East Timor to Mexico, from South Africa to the north of Ireland, all over. What is the driving force for reconciliation? Precisely is what the young students told us this morning. The driving force for reconciliation all over is intergenerational. The driving force is the love of the parents and grandparents for their children and grandchildren. And this is repeated in all the conflicts where we work. Father, so many places, many refugees, victims of gross violations of human rights, crimes against humanity, they have said to me, We want to commit on reconciliation out of the love for our children. We don't want, we cannot stand anymore that our children get entangled in the circle of violence forever. So, preventive reconciliation is to tackle in this intergenerational love, not to give in inheritance to the next generation our violence. I pass now the floor to my co-chair of this task force, Jack Hurst, to go deepening in the perspective of what Father General was mentioning this morning about discernment.
I will just concentrate on one specific aspect for universities, and that is the transdisciplinarity. You will have seen also from all the examples this morning, we have to talk about reconciliation in plural. There are many reconciliations because there are many contexts in which reconciliation is needed, many perspectives on reconciliation. And universities offer us the capacity to look from many perspectives and to enter into a kind of dialogue on these perspectives. I was thinking about a book that is going to be published by a research group in the University of Comillas in Madrid, Grupo de Investigación RIT, Reconciliación Ignaciana Transdisciplinar. It has 3 words which are very interesting for a Jesuit take on reconciliation. It has reconciliación, it has transdisciplinaridad, and it has Ignaciana, which I could also, because the book itself says it in its introduction, the book itself says it, our key articulation for the 14 perspectives that we use on the study of forced migration, forced sub-Saharan migration in Spain, the key for articulating these 14 perspectives is common discernment. So transdisciplinarity is connected profoundly to common discernment, and it is not difficult to see that reconciliation in itself is a process of discernment, of common discernment. We try to think of a future together, even between enemies. So reconciliation is a process of discernment, but discernment gives that reconciliation a depth because we look at consolation. We don't look only at methods to bring people together. We look at what is ultimately going to console. So we look at what are the signs of consolation that we find in the processes of reconciliation and that can stimulate us forward. And in transdisciplinarity, you bring people together to be able to discern better by listening to one another and by creatively bring about something new. Now, I've just been asking myself a couple of questions. So if we have these discerning universities at the service of reconciliation, what would that be? And what would that be? Ignatian transdisciplinarity. And Ignatian transdisciplinarity is to discern, and the word spiritually, so the spiritual dimension, the depth dimension comes to discern spiritually the articulation of research, education, and service to society in the mission of reconciliation. It's a process of discernment in a university, but in a university as a whole, in a holistic view of a university. And there are a couple of conditions of possibility to bring about that transdisciplinarity, because trans means not only superseding the different dimensions of disciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, it also means moving into the field so as to learn from what is happening in the field itself. What kind of reconciliation processes are going on there? And the trans means also going to the depth of what will ultimately be consoling for people who are involved in conflict. So I put a couple of conditions of possibility. I'm just going to go through them. They would need much more elaboration than we can do here. So enter into the unjust or violent context as a task for a university. See the urgent signs of the time where God is calling us in our violent context. That's seeing the desolations and the consolations. How is God calling us in these events? Listen to the voices of the discarded and who are suffering the conflicts. And then, I think an important one, trust that God is at work as the reconciler. At the heart of creation, the whole creation is, so to say, the thrust of God towards the kingdom, towards peace, towards reconciliation, but also in the middle, in the multiple voices that you will see in the discernment table, the multiple voices which can be the voices of enemies. How is God also speaking through the voice of my enemy if we get involved in a discernment process together? That's a very difficult task. Huh? I find that very difficult, at least. And then build up hope for the longings of the young. Elias has mentioned the preventive reconciliation, the focus on the young. Listen to the young, but also try to find the sources of hope that can strengthen them in their own longings for a future reconciled world in peace. And those are the words of Arturo Sosa. I tried also to find out a couple of Ignatian leadership challenges for universities. How can they become active instruments of God's active commitment to peace and reconciliation? So how can we, as universities, in a certain sense, make true what we believe and what we enact in the Atanorum, in the final contemplation of the spiritual exercises? So to look for and articulate the signs of consolation and hope for the young and for the world. And that in a transdisciplinary discernment. So by bringing together people from different perspectives in our own universities, but maybe also from outside, to build reconciling communities of practice. That was emphasized also. Elias Omondi said this university, don't be afraid to go into the field. And to become actors of discerning reconciliation. So to enact discerning reconciliation in concrete conflict, but also in one's own university. What Elias and I found out in some of the conferences we had on reconciliation was that people said, but we need reconciliation in our own university. So we need to work in our own university. So sometimes we have to walk the road in our own universities so as to become enabled to walk the road in other conflicts. That's very fast, I'm sorry.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Entonces vamos a pasar a los resultados que hemos tenido en la Task Force hasta el momento. Es un proceso que estamos desarrollando desde hace varios tiempo, entonces vamos viendo un poco cuáles son los resultados en este momento. En la Task Force hemos trabajado principalmente en 3 líneas de acción. En primer lugar, en el mapeo de las iniciativas, después en el networking, en el trabajo en red, de trabajo colaborativo entre estas iniciativas y en la identificación de buenas prácticas y lecciones aprendidas. Hasta el momento han trabajado con nosotros alrededor de 30 universidades en más de 13 países. Entonces voy a invitar a Susana Di Troglio, secretaria ejecutiva del Kirchner Network, que también nos acompaña para ver esa parte. Y para el primer producto les vamos a presentar un breve video que nos da cuenta del mapeo que hemos hecho para identificar esas experiencias significativas a nivel global y cómo hemos construido un geovisor que nos permite una interacción digital con estas experiencias y poder identificarlas de la mejor manera.
The GeoVisor is a tool in the process of construction for being a representative sample of the institutional reality of peace and reconciliation initiatives in the International Association of Jesuit Universities. It aims to be an instrument that compiles the mapping of peace and reconciliation initiatives, facilitating the emergence of community within IAJU and bringing added value through collaborative practices and common discernment. The GeoVisor collects initiatives such as publications, institutional university processes, extracurricular experiences, specific projects, courses or academic programs, centers and institutes specialized in peacebuilding and reconciliation issues. These initiatives have been classified according to the levels of reconciliation based on the Ignatian tradition of the Society of Jesus: reconciliation with oneself, reconciliation with God and the experience of sense, reconciliation with others on an interpersonal level, reconciliation with others on a socio-political level, and reconciliation with creation. We have collected in the exercise at least one initiative from 34 IAJU member institutions that have been exposed in this tool. Each point on the map represents a university, and by clicking on the university point, it is possible to see the various initiatives taking place, get a summary of the initiative, and access further information through a link. The GeoVisor has filters that make it easier to identify, according to interest, reconciliatory initiatives and practices that respond to local, regional, and global challenges. Through the tool, it is possible to access the statistical count of initiatives according to the established filters, making the corresponding selection and applying the desired configuration. It is also possible to select regions on the map where we want to understand and make visible the reconciliation efforts that are being consolidated. We have recognized that this is not a finished mapping of initiatives and that it is an ongoing process of mapping what universities do in response to the challenges of a specific context. We know that there are many initiatives being led by universities and that we are not aware of many of them. That's why we would like to invite you to be part of this experience by sending an email to tfreconciliation@gmail.com.
Jack?
So we have also attempted through the task force to initiate several networks where the Zoom period has been very fruitful for that, so we could really take people from all over the world. We had very large meetings. And the first initiative we took on that, which started at the Madrid conference actually in 2021, in May 2021, is called Reconcilianet. Reconcilianet, and what we tried at the Madrid conference to begin with is to define a little bit the regional challenges to be discerned in reconciliation work. This, you will find some on the map, but of course this is work in progress. And it would be so nice if you would send us your opinions on this. This would really be very helpful for us to complete that in a certain sense, and then to compare it with the pastoral action plans that exist in the various conferences of provincials, and see if that connects with one another. Now, we have gone through a whole process of learnings on how to network. Most of you will know that that is not easy at all, and certainly not to give sustainability to a network. But we have also found out the purpose of such a network, and there are a number of issues that are presented there. To build a learning community of practice where we share our diverse commitments, where we discover ways to support each other, where we reflect on the mission of reconciliation in the Society of Jesus, where we try to find out the added value of Jesuit initiatives in the processes of reconciliation, where we develop constructive interactions between Jesuit institutions and Jesuit institutions of higher education, where we join advocacy, and where we discern priorities at the regional and local level. So we try to do that. We do that by having always in each meeting certainly at least one example of a good practice, and preferably we share this, we do this out of the different 6 conferences of provincials, we take examples. We also have been thinking, because Reconcilianet is not just addressing universities and higher education centers of the Society of Jesus, we have another network for that, but we have also tried to listen to where would we like to encourage university centers of higher education. So to promote transdisciplinary approaches to reconciliation is something that comes out very well for the complexity of the conflict situations. To take into account social-political situations. It was very interesting this morning how strongly Father General emphasized the political commitment, and in his analysis was also very political. To bring community reconciliation processes into the classroom, this is also very connected to service learning in a certain way, where you bring initiatives that exist, and to research what is the meaning of Ignatian reconciliation. So what is our added value, in a certain sense, as Jesuit universities for reconciliation processes? And Elias will present the more university-oriented JESPRI network.
So very briefly, JESPRI, the difference with the other network is that this one, in the previous one, Reconcilianet, we will work universities with other people, sectors, apostolic sectors of the Society of Jesus, which are already working also with reconciliation and want to work together. JESPRI is different. JESPRI is only for centers related to our universities, okay? It is a proposal also in discernment. It is the collaboration among academic institutes or centers, chairs, and departments specialized in peace studies, conflict resolution, conflict transformation, mediation, healing of memories, trust building, transitional and restorative justice, forgiveness, reconciliation. So we are looking in each of the 6 regions of the provincial conferences, which are the centers that are really specialized in this work on reconciliation. Because we need to link up. We need to link up to go deeper in research, going deeper in education, going deeper in transfer of knowledge to the society in general. So if you have centers in your own university which are specialized in this, please let us know, because we would like to create a type of organization, association, maybe following a bit the example, but not surely exactly the same, of the Jesuit business schools. So a type of Jesuit peace and reconciliation institutes. But this is a discernment that is going on, and we need your help to go further in this idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Elia. Good afternoon, everybody. We are glad to present the 3rd issue of the Best Practices in Jesuit Higher Education program, which is a joint effort, a global effort of the IAJU that seeks to collect, share, and discuss good practices in mission integration, formation, and management developed by Jesuit university and colleges around the world. This 3rd issue is the fruit of a collaboration between the IAJU Task Force on Reconciliation and Peace and the Best Practices Program of the IAJU. Thank you, Elias, Jack, Gaia, Elena Lozano, who is at the University of Loyola, and Karen, that is over there, and also Maria Camila from the Javeriana Cali, who cannot join us today because of the visa problem, and also to the 24 authors who collaborate with their manuscript for this issue. So besides all of the best practices that we have published on the book, we have also 18 new best practices from our Jesuit University. As we have heard, Jesuit University participate in this mission of justice and reconciliation, and as they seek to offer an integral education, research, serves the society, but also to foster an internal organizational culture that cares for everybody of our university community worldwide. In this issue that we are presented, a collection of 18 good practices. You can access all of these new practices. You can see the magazine, you can see the infographic, the lesson learned, using that QR code. 18 good practices from the 6 regional network of the IAJU, AJCU, North American, Latin American, and the Caribbean, Europe and Lebanon, Asia Pacific, South Asia, and Africa, and Madagascar. They are all good practices that work towards reconciling by seeking to restore just and fraternal relationship between individuals and groups and community in our countries. They are also an excellent example of how our Jesuit University can collaborate with other organizations and community in a shared mission to bring about just and fraternal society in our country. Let me show just 2 of these best practices that we are sharing in this newsletter. The first one is from the Jesuit Worldwide Learning, who is now a new member of the Kirchen Network Association in Europe and Lebanon. And these best practices from GWL looks at one of the professional courses that the GWL is offering, the Peace Leader Program, which is accredited by the Hekima University College in Kenya. This practice shows how this course enables peace and reconciliation in fragile and complex contexts. Through its blended learning approach, rooted in the Ignatian pedagogy, this course allows the student to explore the experience of peace in a country like Iraq, with a multi-ethnic and multi-religious context wounded by a recent history of war and conflict, in which peace and reconciliation are crucial to promoting intercultural and interreligious dialogue and enable a social transformation and stability in those countries. The second one that we want to share with you, but you can see and we invited you to read the 18 best practices, is from Marquette University. In this article, the author described their experiences engaging in a collaborative and horizontal partnership between Marquette University and Notre Dame School of Milwaukee to support the development of a curriculum that helped key 12 students, elementary, higher education, secondary education students, to learn about reconciliation across multiple levels, developing internal coping and resilience, as well as interpersonal skills to resolve conflicts and build peace. This initiative took place over a year early in the COVID-19 pandemic and offered an adaptable model to fully integrating K-12 school and its community stakeholders into fostering skills to promote resilience and peace. The author first described the background of the peace education curriculum at the heart of the initiative, and then detailed the approach taken and lesson learned with a focus on informing best practices for this type of collaboration. So these 18 best practices demonstrate the value and all of the knowledge that our Jesuit University have in promoting peace and reconciliation. So we invite you all to read these best practices. We also invite you to the webinars that we are going to start this November. The first webinar will be an international conference with a panel of experts that will further discuss the role of Jesuit University in promoting the mission of reconciliation and social justice. In December, we will start with a series of webinars with these 24 authors for this third issue on best practices on reconciliation to promote a worldwide discussion and networking among the global and Asian community. We hope that you enjoy reading all of these best practices, looking at the magazine and the infographic, and find this collection of good practices useful for your mission. So we encourage you to share these best practices with your community within your institution. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Susana. Gracias. Y bueno, con este recorrido y todas estas experiencias e iniciativas de reconciliación, también queremos escucharles a ustedes. Seguramente, como dijimos, hay muchas iniciativas que todavía no conocemos. Entonces, tenemos un Mentimeter, una herramienta que nos va a permitir interactuar más rápidamente entre todos. Pueden escanear el código QR o pueden entrar a www.menti.com y insertar el código que aparece en la pantalla. Son 4 preguntas que vamos a ir recorriendo un poco para conocer su opinión, y también el día de mañana vamos a poder recibir más preguntas y más ideas de su parte. Las preguntas son en inglés en la herramienta, entonces voy a leer la primera en español. Entonces considero que está mi universidad comprometida de manera concreta con la misión de reconciliación de la Compañía de Jesús. Entonces allí tienen varias opciones que pueden ver. Entonces veo que ya vamos bastantes personas participando. Aquí podemos ver cómo se mueven los aportes en vivo y directo. Entonces tenemos casi un empate entre un compromiso moderado y el compromiso alto y muy alto. Entonces, pues nos invita como a movernos más hacia ese compromiso muy alto con esa misión de reconciliación. Y bueno, creo que podemos ir pasando, ahí van votando los últimos, a la siguiente pregunta. La siguiente pregunta es: ¿cuántas iniciativas en mi universidad están explícitamente relacionadas con la misión de reconciliación en las 3 funciones sustantivas: la investigación, la educación y el servicio a la sociedad? Entonces, aquí obviamente se trata de hacer memoria rápida de las iniciativas que ustedes conocen directamente y que están más relacionadas con la temática de reconciliación y que sean más significativas.
You have to be honest, of course. Huh?
Nada de inventar iniciativas. Bueno, esta herramienta nos muestra un promedio, entonces nos da como la idea de cuál es el promedio de iniciativas que tenemos en nuestras universidades, en las universidades acá presentes. Entonces vemos cómo hay predomina las iniciativas en el ámbito del servicio. Entonces nos hace un llamado, por supuesto, a promover más iniciativas desde la función de investigación, que la vemos más bajita, y también un poco la invitación que nos hacía Jack, ¿no? de esa transdisciplinariedad y ese trabajo entre las tres funciones sustantivas. Aunque aquí la herramienta nos permite construir como esos picos, donde vemos que hay pues respuestas de algunas universidades donde tienen más iniciativas, por ejemplo, en servicio, entonces nos va aumentando el promedio, mientras que la mayoría de personas, por ejemplo, en iniciativas de educación, contestaron que hay alrededor de una iniciativa, la mayoría de las personas, 10 personas sobre pues, todos los que están aquí presentes. Entonces, pasamos a la... últimas dos preguntas. Si usted considera que la tradición espiritual ignaciana aporta innovación y valor añadido en el trabajo de reconciliación, donde 1 es poco y 5 es mucho. Entonces, bueno, esta información que ahora vemos muy rápidamente por el tiempo, nosotros la vamos a tener registrada y nos va a permitir, digamos, un análisis para la próxima reunión de Reconcilianet que tendremos en octubre. Entonces, bueno, aquí tenemos una fuerte en el muy alto aporte. Y como no hay tiempo, voy a ir a la última pregunta. Esta no va a aparecer en la pantalla, pero muy importante para nosotros es que si están interesados en colaborar en esa task force, pueden ingresar aquí su nombre, su correo electrónico y la institución de la cual son parte. Esto no va a aparecer en la pantalla, sino que lo vamos a recibir nosotros para poder entrar en contacto con ustedes. Le doy la palabra a Elías para cerrar, y para los que están interesados nos vemos mañana en el Salón 205.
Le damos un aplauso a Gaia por el espléndido trabajo de facilitación y a toda la mesa. Gracias por vuestra participación. Y por último, invitamos al padre Joseph Christie a subir y a recibir de la mano de los dos rectores de la Javeriana y de Comillas el volumen publicado sobre este tema de reconciliación ignaciana. Muchas gracias, padre Christie. Muchas gracias, padre Humberto, padre Quique. Gracias por vuestro servicio. Y ahí estamos, fotos. Conviene un aplauso para ellos. Gracias por el esfuerzo. Gracias a todos vosotros por acompañarnos en esta sesión. Thank you very much. See you at Mass.